On a previous video, I put up the odd thing I noticed that some fishing weights are shaped a lot like bullets. They're called bullet weights. And they have a very disturbingly hollow point look to them. And I mused about, wouldn't it be neat if they could be melted or altered? Nope. 95% tungsten and 5% nickel alloy. I also put this into the description, I think. They're too hard and too high temperature melting to be of any practical value for that. However, at 0.2 inches, could you use a tungsten core bullet this way? Well, they're 25 cents a pop versus you firing your normal rounds at a nickel a pop when you can get them cheap. So unless you're doing something very, very specific or have a very different version of this, not practical. But it is interesting to note, I should point this out, that this is truly much better for the environment. While these are not tungsten and nickel melted, they are fused or sintered, and they do have a tendency of not damaging the environment at all. And yeah, I suppose you could chuck a bunch of these into a shotgun shell. I don't know. But the point is, a little public service announcement. There isn't any practical reason to advocate for using lead for fishing if you can use steel. People have used steel nails in fake worms for a long time. By the way, that's foreshadowing. And we use all sorts of things for fishing. I used to be a fishing person. I used to go fishing. And no, it's not an example of political correctness. Lead is actually bad for the environment, and it needs to just not be used anymore. Sorry to say, if you have a differing opinion, you're wrong. I'm just kidding. But no, really, it really is bad for the environment, and switching away from it is really easy because many shops don't carry anything but tungsten, at least in an area that excludes lead. And honestly, you're pulling from the water what you're going to eat, and it's water that would be drinkable if you didn't have lead in it. Just saying. And of course, yes, birds pick it up too because they eat the lead, not just from being shot. Let's continue. And this is the drop shot bullet weights, pointing out an interesting thing. At 1.8 the density for tungsten, and it mostly being tungsten, a lot of these are not really bullet weights. They're just egg weights that have been chopped so that they'll be the right mass, so it'll be 3/4 ounce and that sort of thing, so that it is what the package says. And I'm emphasis on 1/16 of an ounce, 27 grains, being a number that you might want to remember because, again, it's 0.2 inches on that example. This one is obviously not. It's much more flared out. And there being a variety of them, and also, yes, I really want to fire that out of a shotgun. But let's move on. Now, this is the combined collection of garbage data from Wikipedia about lead versus steel shot. You notice the steel shot is much more sparse. Used for various shotgun shells for pest shot, bird shot, and this whole area here that overlaps where they have duplicates called waterfowl, and then finally buckshot. F is for fowl, T is for turkey, I guess. B is for bird. Anyway, I wanted to point out something interesting in the Wikipedia version of it. The 17 caliber pellet gun rifle barrel diameter designated .177 diameter air rifle pellets are smaller than the BB gun pellets, which are supposed to be 18, and smaller than that is something called B, I guess that's for bird, 17 caliber pellets that would work in these without having to worry about the rifling being a problem, and would be universal if you happen to have a pellet gun that fires pellets and BBs. Instead of using BBs, you could get Bs. I'm going to have to do a diagram or a picture where it shows bees flying out of a gun. Wasps. Anyway, I wanted to point out that it is only available, according to the Wikipedia page, which doesn't mean anything, as 86 steel round balls per ounce in a cartridge that's obviously for birdshot. The double B comes in lead or steel. And if it's lead, you can squeeze it down to a different diameter, but then again, you'd have to load it like an air rifle pellet. I'm going to get to that in a minute. I also wanted to point out the 22 caliber over here. Where is it? I lost it. Emphasis at it is 16 grains if it's a sphere. Now, obviously, if it's a 22 caliber bullet designed to go through the air properly, it's going to be longer and skinnier. It's going to have more mass, more aerodynamics. It's going to be more than 16 grains, usually double or quadruple. Also, I should point out that you could maybe start with something bigger and squeeze it down to make that. And here we have the prominently noted 40 grain pellet at 30 caliber. That's going to come up in a minute. Let's move on. This is the mass mathematically to the diameter if they were perfect spheres, and it gets things completely confusing here. But anyway, F is supposed to be 22 caliber, mathematically and also physically. Remember, if it's lead especially, and even for steel shot, it's only averaging. It doesn't have to be the exact diameter. Although I will state that steel shot is usually, but not always, much more consistent. And again, this uses buck, waterfowl, bird shot, then bird and clay crossover, and then finally pest size. Basically dust all the way to something so tiny I don't even know why it's listed. And again, over here, equivalent information over here for the buckshot, just because I thought I'd put it in there. It should be pointed out that what they call quadruple-aught buck at 37.5 caliber works out at 38 caliber over here. So again, mathematics or expectations versus reality. Now we're going to get on to the quasi-main subject here. On Amazon. If you can sell it on Amazon, you can talk about it on YouTube. At least that's the idea. Yes, that's actually advice I've gotten. There's a $30 scoped pellet gun that can also shoot BBs. That means it's not the correct bore diameter or rifling for a 17 caliber pellet. It goes 600 feet per second minimum, and this one uses a pump action with this brown forend. You pull this back to load it, and if it's a BB, it's attracted to the magnet, and you can, some much more expensive ones, base it on whether it's steel or lead. It'll load it slightly differently. And up here is a sort of tube magazine that forms up. You have to reload it every once in a while by pulling this back because there's a reservoir of BBs. You get them lined up so the magnet can grab it and put it in here. And it's assuming your pellets aren't magnetic. Some pellets are. But anyway, it loads them differently by you loading it manually. Someone made a mod where they altered their pellets to put a magnet in front, or just altered this instead, or both, so that they could put pellets in here, put a spring behind it, or whatever, and make it to where the magnet would pull down on these, and or some other mechanism, so they could load pellet after pellet, making it a pseudo-repeater. Now, what would be the reason for doing that? Well, they took this barrel, specifically, this was where I got this idea from, and put it in here. Apparently, you can do some modifications and make it work, and they put a full pressure compressed air container instead of using the pump action. And then they dieseled it, so they got something the equivalent to a 17 HMR because they used a steel-tipped dart and was able to get away with, technically, hitting as accurately as they could their 17 HMR gun that cost 10 times the amount. Just pointing that out. So here we are with the 22 caliber diameter birdshot F, or buckshot, as 16 grains. 27 pellets per ounce is actually where they get the number from, and that's an average. They're not perfectly round. But as a source for lead, or a source for, steel shot if you want to use it, these can be considered for numbers. Next, steel shot's going to be more consistent in diameter and may actually be right on the money. Hence the use of B versus BB pellets in your BB gun might be better for it, especially if it has a rifle barrel and a combination that you made from that cheap, essentially $50 gun you could build. I want to point out the masses of the projectiles that come out of various 22 caliber rounds. There's the NATO 5.56, which is a big cartridge that fires a little bullet, but it can be really long, so it can be heavy. Then there's the 223, which has much more range to it. You can get away with a lot more variance in it, which is the reason I'm using it for a standard for a conclusion here. And then you have the 22 Magnum and the 22 short and long rifles, which can have 30 to 40 or 30 to 56 grain projectiles. That's anywhere from number 1, number 2, or double-aught buck mass, which normally is 27 to 33 caliber lead ball. Now, when you take the equivalent to the mass for a 5.56, you end up with double-aught or triple-aught buck from 33 to 36, and then here's our magic 27 at the low end for 223, which is considered, at least in the public's mind sometimes, or some gunners' minds, to be the civilian cartridge. This has a wider range from 36 grains to 77 grains, covering the entire range on the low end from 22 long rifle and Magnum all the way up to heavier than 5.56 NATO standards, which works out to, again, 27 to 36 caliber round lead balls from number 1 buck to triple-aught buck being melted down to form these bullets. And yes, you can take 5.56 and 223 bullets and jam them into 22 long rifle and Magnum cartridges for single shots. and vice versa. If you put a lighter bullet in, it goes faster. But the .22 caliber diameter round ball F birdshot or buckshot is 16 grains, almost exactly 1/4 the maximum mass for that, and nowhere near the minimum mass for any of these. So you'd have to use 2 of these at least to be able to be equal to that, which is the reason you see people talking about taking apart birdshot containers, both steel and lead, and making steel-tipped or tungsten-tipped bullets for all of these lately on some of those weird forums. Again, the standard is based on number of pellets per ounce equaling a certain number of grains or diameter on average based on mathematics or measurement. It is not necessarily accurate and should not be taken at face value. And I wanted to point out, primarily this was me trying to look up a way to find a really cheap source of ammunition, and my idea was to make this bolt or pin shove in and form a lead round ball into the shape of a pellet to fire it to make an extremely cheap rifled barrel gun out of this. But I found a bunch of other people who were all along the same lines who came up with even better ideas, including dieseling it so you could turn this way down on the pressure and get rifle-like speeds. And also, yes, there's a link in the description. You can put a .22 caliber barrel on this thing, apparently. You can get away with transferring enough parts from a parts kit to make it .22 caliber and end up with something that shoots 22 long rifle quality and speed by just using dieseling and an air tank. Thanks for watching. Have a good day. Good luck with all that.